welcome back to Unite 21 Day 2. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're coming back after Day 1, great to have you back with us. We have got another fantastic day full of all sessions covering employee experience. Today, loads of amazing special guest speakers, which we're very excited about, of course. We're going to be deep diving into some case studies around intranets and employee experience platforms, of course. But we're also going to be talking about things like mental health and well-being and the very important role that plays in ensuring that we have happy and productive workplaces. So lots of great stuff. Now, in terms of the running of the day, just a few things to remember. There will be a couple of minutes as we move from session to session. So that's to be expected. For example, when we finish our welcome and intros that we're doing right now, there'll just be a brief couple of minutes as we switch to another feed and another session. And that's because we're obviously moving between different locations and streaming in all of our speakers from various places around the world. So do expect that. And of course, as part of that, everything is coming live. And as I said yesterday, that isn't live recorded a few days ago. That is live. Everything is coming to you directly. How live and extra live, just to be sure. So all of the sessions are streaming directly from various different locations. Of course, I'm joined by my co-hosts again, who are going to help us keep the day running forwards. I've got Kaz Hassan here with me in the London studio, but we also have Caitlin and Sanika, Caitlin Oriema and Sanika Gentiles over in New York, and shortly I will throw it over to them as well. Obviously, there were a few kind of technical hiccups yesterday, but we've sorted all of that out, and we're looking forward to a really great day today. And of course, all those sessions from yesterday available on demand as well. As always, we do have our watch parties. We've invited all of our Unily colleagues to tune in from various different office locations. I think this morning we are going to go to our New York watch party and see what they are up to. I think it's pretty early over there. There we go. Wow, that is a busy office. John Parker, front right. There we go. Shout out for you. There we go. We've got Glenn. Yeah,
they're having a ball.
I know. The shout outs always get people excited. And there's some kind of inflatable unicorn at the back, which is pretty impressive as well. So whoever's idea that was, I rate that. So they're on the coffee. I think UK are knee deep in the office beer at the moment, so we'll maybe come back to them later. So fantastic, great to see them having a good time. Now, the time thing, of course, with it being streamed from various different locations and our 3,000 attendees tuning in from various different locations, the time thing can get a little confusing. If you are trying to stay on track with what's coming up next, go to unily.com/unite-21. Everything you need to know is there. That will keep you with us and make sure you don't miss any of the great content that we've got coming over the course of the day. And that's a great point for you, Kaz. Yes. Tell us what's coming today.
So we've obviously got a very packed agenda, so many sessions going on, even some sessions going on at the same time. So if you want to pick up a session that you've missed, or if you just want to go back again and watch it twice, make extra notes, look at the slides again, also fine. You'll be able to catch all of that on demand for 30 days. Just go to unily.com/unite-21. And everything will be there. But if you don't remember that address, also don't worry, we'll be sending up a wrap-up at the end of the day. Yes. Loads of links for you to check out, loads of content, feedback, everything. And as we said, we've got a packed agenda. I just wanted to give a little plug to my session later with Tan France, one of our keynote sessions. And we are going to be discussing the power of difference. So we'll be touching on topics like individuality in the workplace, diversity and inclusion initiatives, all the great stuff. And as ever, Tan France, I'm sure, will be sharing his very frank thoughts. So please do join us for that. You can also submit questions in the session as well, and I'll be picking them up towards the end of the session. But we also have a lot more for you to cover, and I don't want to hog up all the time here in London. Give our chance for our co-hosts in New York to also let you know what's happening. And how's your day going, Caitlin?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Good to be here again. Our day is going well. It's still early over here. It's, what are we, just about 9 o'clock, but we've been up for a while. Yeah. I was actually watching the news this morning and heard that the Mega Millions lottery winner was actually in New York City last night. Mm-hmm. So he's either going to take the cash payout of $315. Would you take the cash payout, or would you take?
I'd take my time. You know, you have to be mindful of those taxes. Take my time.
Either way,
the money in.
The winner was not us. So we're still here with you. We'd be here either way, of course, but we're still here with you. We have a ton of great stuff coming over the net today and tomorrow. Starting with a quick reminder of the Ask an IC Expert session that's coming up. So we wanted to remind you to submit your questions to unily.com/feedback. This is your chance to get all of your questions answered by the pros. This is going to be so great. I can't encourage this enough, so make sure you submit your questions ahead of time. We also wanted to do a quick, and then that's also by 4:05 p.m. UTC. And then we also wanted to do another quick reminder about, if you are loving the content today, yesterday, and tomorrow, join us for our podcast. We mentioned it yesterday and want to remind everyone again, we have this podcast, we put out all this great content. I love this picture. Glenn Chambers is my boss, so I love this particular picture of the coconut and the beach ball. We have a lot of fun here, so we want you to come join us. And all the great content that we share on that. We offer tips and cool stories about our clients, so join us. And then we also wanted to remind you that in addition to all of the great fun we're having over the next 2 days that we have left, we also have the after party. So there's limited availability because, as we know, everything that's going on, so we want you to RSVP. That is required. So we're having it at the Wren in New York City. We're having it at Simmons Bar for the London team. We want to see you there, but make sure you do RSVP online at unily.com.
Awesome, and we're going to jump right into day 2 of Engage and what's going to happen for today. So I hope that you enjoyed the workout this morning, that HIIT class. I heard it was amazing. We were in glam, so unfortunately we didn't get a chance to participate. But shortly, Matt and Kaz will be speaking to Fearne about a happy workplace and how to really get there in this day and time, right? Shortly after, we'll be speaking to the Unily team about operations and infrastructure, moving right into our session about boosting adoption with our senior CSM, Emma Horder. She will be hosting that session with Selnese. And then we will speak to Tan France about the power of difference. And he definitely has some great perspective to add to our day today. Moving right on, we'll have some roundtables that will be talking about how we're measuring success, how we're driving that social component of your digital workplace. Then back to those questions that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Ask your IC expert. Definitely submit those questions. It's definitely going to be something you want to hear. And then Caitlin and I will be speaking to Crayola about how they have transitioned from in-person to intranet so seamlessly during a time of uncertainty. Then we will wrap up and look forward to the next day. But before that, we want to talk about these prizes. So in addition to great content, we will also be giving out yet another Amazon gift card. So feel free to continue to tweet, use those hashtags on LinkedIn, Unite21, internal communications, employee experience. We're looking for you. We have the cash and we're trying to give you the voucher, okay? And then tomorrow we will have a live voting process for the best homepage. And these are actually the homepages that were submitted from our client base, and these are our 3 finalists. So the winner will be announced and chosen tomorrow on live 4:50 UTC time.
Hello everybody and welcome to the first session of Unite 21 on day 2. Kicking off day 2, our opening keynote speaker is a broadcaster, best-selling author and podcast host. She started her career as a television presenter at the age of 15, and she has hosted BBC's Top of the Pops, was the first ever permanent female host on BBC Radio 1's chart show, and is the founder of the massively popular Happy Place podcast. In recent years, she's become an ambassador for wellness to so many people around the world, with several books on the topic and chart-topping Happy Place podcast amassing over 40 million downloads. She has spoken to some of the most successful people on the planet about their journeys to happiness and well-being. we couldn't be happier that she's here in our London studio. Please welcome Fearne Cotton.
Generous introduction, very lovely.
Excellent, glad you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for being here with us. It's really fantastic to have you with us to talk to you. So I thought I wanted to kind of jump in straight away and just, with the huge success of the Happy Place podcast, I just want to ask you straight away, please tell us the secret to happiness, Fearne. What is it?
Such a huge question to start with. If I knew the answer, I would just give up all of this now, because I think I'm just forever searching for that answer. And I think there isn't really ever one answer. There's bespoke answers for the individual, there's collective answers for groups of people in society, but I don't think there's one solution ever. I think the nearest I've come to figuring it out is probably liking yourself. I think is a real key component to feeling well daily, and that means not just our physical bodies and whatnot and how we feel, but our past and emotionally what's going on for us. I think that's a big one, which I'm not quite at. I think it's a sort of a daily practice, but it's an important one nonetheless.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm pretty much sold already.
We're done now.
Yeah. So easy.
I know. Yeah, exactly. But obviously we really like to dive deeper with you today for everyone listening. And I think that, we wanted to start first by talking a little bit about the podcast. Obviously, 40 million downloads. Actually, my stepmom is one of the people I said I was interviewing.
What about you?
Well, I'm now realising that I need to download
Yes,
it
you
because
do.
Obviously.
I love your stepmom. That's very kind.
I know. She was like, "Yeah, I've got that on my phone right now." Incredible, But obviously, hugely popular podcast, and I guess we're interested to understand a little bit off the back of an interview we did yesterday with Louis Theroux. He mentioned that he thinks that podcasting is absolutely, one of the best mediums for delivering important messages. So can you tell us a little bit about why you chose, the podcast as a format for exploring the topic of...
Yeah, I mean, it was almost accidental because I'd had a tough time personally, and I wanted to sort of move away from what I had been traditionally doing because I felt I couldn't cope with a lot of what was going on, and sort of doing the more traditional broadcasting just didn't feel right at that point in my life. So I was sort of starting again. So book writing came first, and that was a really wonderful catharsis. But then I wanted to broaden how I spoke to my audience and the subjects I was covering. And podcasting wasn't as kind of huge and ubiquitous as it is today. So I thought this will be super underground. I can just, practice doing some nice little chats. And that snowballed with the natural momentum of the podcast world opening up. So it was really lovely timing. Very, very lucky in terms of that. But I think podcasting is so special because there's no rush. You've got this long format to work with, and there's no rules. You don't have to, have an item or a structure. I just talk for an hour. That's literally the structure of it. And it gives people time to relax, so you get to that sweet spot of them trusting you, because I don't always know the people I'm chatting to. And also they know that it's safe. It's a knife. I'm not trying to sort of get anything salacious out of them or trick them. I want to have a really decent chat where I'm listening to them more than anything and give them that time. And it can't be taken out of context, because you've got an hour plus long conversation where taking one snippet from that is not fair to the guest if you're using it in the press, etc. But you can go back and you can refer to a whole beautiful, intimate conversation. So, having come from a radio background where you've got 3 minutes to get like the most amazing thing out of a guest, to have an hour is just like a luxury, and a beautiful one at that.
So that's interesting. So you mentioned you dabbled in writing as well. You've done radio, TV. I think yesterday in your intro I was like, you're the queen of all the channels.
Oh, thank
you. So you said what you like about podcasting is you can go deeper. It's kind of unfiltered. How do you kind of fine tune what podcasting is the right channel for versus what you might say, I want to write about that, or I want to go on radio and talk about that, or come on one of these interviews?
Well, I think with the podcast, the content is really informed by the guest. So I'll do a ton of research on whoever it is I'm talking to, the subject matters that might naturally end up being talked about, and then it's over to them. I'm merely queuing up things that I'm genuinely curious about to see where that leads us as a pair, because it's a real collaborative process working on a podcast. It's not me just sort of grilling someone, and it's not them just sort of talking for an hour. It's got to be a nice sort of dance of two people working their way through things, and I'm very open about my own personal stuff, so if I need to tell an anecdote or match what they're saying, then that's also lovely, and hopefully that provides the audience with something that's genuine. So the podcast is much more informed by the guest, but then books are just, right, what am I going through? What am I having trouble with? Let's write about it. So any problems that I have mentally or situations that are playing out just gives me more to write about. So that's a gift in itself.
And so that format, you're right, so you speak to loads of different guests, you've got some of the biggest names, celebrities. Also what's cool is that you go through different types of people. You go from musicians to YouTubers to so many different people. And I guess you've done a lot of episodes now and a lot of listeners. What have you learned along that kind of podcasting journey? What kind of things would you say are now wow, I can't believe I got that out of that format, or
yeah. Well, I think talking about sort of podcasting as a medium, I've learned lots about interviewing people, because I didn't have the opportunity to interview someone for that long. Prior to that, I did sort of 20 years of my career with doing these short, punchy interviews where you had to get something entertaining. Whereas I'm not so bothered about the entertainment factor. If there's no laughter during the episode, if there's no hilarious story, that's fine. This is much more about connection and meeting with someone heart to heart rather than it being anything else. So I've learned to listen properly, and I've always liked listening because I want to learn, but this is now the main focus for me, is not, okay, what's my next question, what can I get out of them? It's, God, so interesting what they've just said, and try to sort of go then the next layer beneath that. Okay, well, what's underneath that story, or what's underneath that emotion, or whatever. So you have to really sort of excavate the subject that you're talking about. And, you learn something every episode from doing that, because you're just hearing people's life stories, and storytelling is the most underrated thing out there. It's the best place to learn anything about life, is just listening to other people tell stories.
I mean, that's actually, I'm sure, going to be a very inspirational statement. I mean, a lot of the people obviously with us today are internal communicators. They're the storytellers behind the face, behind the brand of so many notable and recognisable organisations around the world. I guess the bit that I'm really interested in there that you talked about is the kind of organic nature of the podcast, and how that kind of exposes deeper insights. Do you think, as a format, podcasting is something that should be explored more within the organisation, for example, within businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's never ending. There's never sort of an end point with the format of a podcast, because there's always something to learn. Like your first question, what's the key to happiness? I still obviously don't know. I don't think anyone, there's probably a few enlightened individuals on the planet that might have an inkling, but we still don't really know. And because I think the focus becomes, say with that question, how do you get happy? Whereas actually then you start getting into these subject matters or these conversations where you go, is that the point of it, though? Is being happy the point of us being here? I don't think so. I think it's one of the things that we should be experiencing, but there's such depth and richness in lots of other emotions that we might deem negative. So with a podcast, it's endless. You could pick one topic and do 100 episodes on it, because there's always going to be a different point of view depending on who you're talking to, what their life experience is. So you're not going to get bored with that one. So that's why it is endless. And it is lovely to have a sort of organic nature to a podcast, because, again, I came from a background of years and years of, having either auto cue or a scripted segment to something, or radio is not scripted but so fast paced with timings, and you've got to hit the news on time, and there's music beds, and it's technically very overwhelming. Whereas with a podcast, you're just literally you're chilling, you're swimming in the sea, you're just in this beautiful space. And that's, to be used in the best possible way. So how are you going to use it? How are you going to get so curious about something that people haven't talked about in a deep, explicit way before? So it's endless. So I think podcasting is a brilliant tool for any workplace.
And I think, so one of the things that a lot of internal communicators will do is, work very closely with kind of members of their leadership team to, put out important business messages. And I think that there is, potentially in some organisations a tendency to sculpt the identity of members of the leadership team in a certain light to make sure certain messages land the right way. And I guess, with the podcast piece, you said that it was very organic. So do you think that you now in your podcast are more true to yourself as opposed to everything you did before?
Of course, absolutely, because also I started on TV in the 90s, so the conversation around mental health was, in that realm, sort of non-existent. There was very few individuals who would talk publicly about having any sort of mental health issues or anything. That was more specialised or came from very sort of medical backgrounds. So, but also I hadn't dealt with anything in life at that point. I wasn't sort of dealing with any deep trauma or problems. So, I was just smiling and going, yay, here's a cartoon, and here's a dog, and here's an inflatable sofa, or whatever. And then, when you're doing something like Top of the Pops or radio, it's not your space. You're occupying the space of a legendary show. So there's respect that's needed, that, you stick to what people know and expect. So you don't have as much room to be yourself. And also people don't want to hear you at 10 a.m. on the radio saying, oh my God, I had a panic attack last night. That's not the space for it. And there's not the time for it. I think you've got to find the right, time and space to have these conversations. And mine happened accidentally, that I had to let go of everything and start from the ground up. And it obviously started with books, which felt sort of private and no one is going to ever read this, I'm just writing. And then obviously people do read it, and then you go, oh, people are now reacting to what I've just written. There's something in this. And then, I feel, 10 years ago I would not have felt comfortable having these conversations. Now I feel so comfortable talking about the nitty-gritty of life, the bits that are squeamish and uncomfortable and might have things attached to them that feel, like horrible emotions like shame and guilt. I love talking about that stuff. And doing the other stuff, like holding a microphone and going, hello, welcome to a show, I feel deeply uncomfortable with. So it's completely turned on its head now, and I don't know how I would feel going back into that space. I don't know. I mean, I might do it again one day, but at the moment, I'm enjoying exploring being me, but in the public eye.
So, amazing.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. I didn't necessarily think about it like that, but I think that's quite true. And so you spoke about like that format, how it's really important, and you also kind of said how you originally started going down the writing avenue, and then you ended up in the podcast, and that kind of came about from you opening up about your own struggles, which I think is a great thing to do, and how things have changed. Do you think that, actually what I really like about the podcast is that it's called Happy Place, and you get guests on and you talk about their happy place and you go through really deep topics. Typically, conversations around like mental health and wellness can either be kind of shushed down, like not spoken about, especially being a Brit, sometimes it's a bit of a stiff upper lip type thing. But you've kind of, the way I perceived it is you approached it from like a happy place, which to me seems a bit more of like a positive outlook way of looking at it. Was that conscious?
I think we've always got to leave listeners feeling safe. Like you can't leave someone sort of, hanging off a cliff going, oh my God, I'm just dealing with all of this conversation that's just taken place, and I'm having to deal with these thoughts that I'm having about my own life in regards to the subjects that have been discussed. So you've always got to round it off in perhaps a hopeful way, or at least the story that you're talking around has hope attached to it. And I think all of my guests naturally do that because they're in a place where they feel safe talking about it. So they've made peace with certain elements of their life, as I have, and there are some bits that I haven't, and that's also fine. But I think the name can at times be misleading because it's certainly not always aiming for it to be like, and the end, the world is all happy and lovely. I like the fact that the title is quite loaded, that we've called it Happy Place, and that there could be such a thing, because to me there is no final destination where you are happy. It's much more about the detail in life and the small bits and the bits that you're noticing along the way. So I like the loaded title. So we're not scared to go into deep, dark subjects, but I don't want to leave listeners feeling bleak and desperate after. There has to be an element of hope, and there has to be an element of safety for the listeners.
And you think that is, for many organisations and, many of the attendees today, I guess mental health and well-being as a topic has surged in importance within organisations with the global pandemic and many organisations suffering from an inability to connect with their people and bring them together safely and securely, but also in person. That mental health and well-being topic has surged in importance. Is that, would that be your main piece of advice to them? Make sure that when you talk about mental health and well-being, as they must now within their enterprise, end on a positive, explore the darkness, but try and end high?
I mean, it really depends. I think, I'm not a professional. My conversations are based on anecdotes and experience only, and things that I've experienced or my guests have. But I think from the relationship that I have with my listeners, which is a really beautiful relationship, where there's a constant dialogue going on, they listen to the podcast and we have wonderful chats going on elsewhere and the festival that we put on, etc. It is really important to, as I said, sort of have an underbelly of hope there. But I think there's obviously a time and a place for professional advice, and that's really needed, especially as you've just said, after the bizarre year and a half that we are still living through now. And it's motivated me massively because I've got friends who work in all different job descriptions, and some of them, for me personally, I love working at home. I'm an introvert, I like working alone, I like being alone, I need to be on my own to counterbalance all the talking that I do to other people. But then I've got friends who are by nature extroverts, and they bounce off, they feed off other people's energy in a beautiful way where it boosts them, they boost others. And they have struggled so massively that they've headed, I would say, for some of them, towards a depression, because they're missing out on something that's so vital to their working life, which is relationships. And we have to have healthy relationships to feel good. We have to. That is a fundamental. We all know that, whether it's with our colleagues, with our family. So for people who need that, and I think there are two different types of people that aren't so bothered and need it, both need to be catered for. And I think that's the good thing that's come out of this. There's more flexibility. Can you work from home a bit? Do you want to work in your team? There's more discussion around that. But for the people that are really not dealing well with being at home, especially, I've got kids, so that bit was a living nightmare during the pandemic for all parents. It was impossible. Let's not sugarcoat it. It wasn't fun trying to do, like a history lesson whilst I'm also planning for a podcast. That's an awful combination. Awful. So people have massively struggled mentally, and people that have not before, that have never had anxiety, that have never felt anywhere near depressed, that have been feeling deeply thrown by what we've been through. So the conversation needs to be ramped up. I don't know, going back to your original question, if it does need to finish on an up. I just think people need to feel held. They need to feel listened to. Rather than being bombarded with advice, which is sometimes counterproductive, people just want to be heard. They just want to be listened to. And I think if you've got someone in place that can do that and can hear what's being said and not, palm it off or just go, do this, this and this and it'll be fine. You can sometimes be silent and that's enough. That's, again, what I've learned just through doing the podcast. I sometimes don't have to say anything after a seriously heartfelt, it could be, devastating sentence. If that person feels truly listened to, that can be enough. So I think it's less about, and let's end it on a high, let's just make sure that I've really heard what you're saying.
I think what I really like about that point, and specifically with the audience as well, is I feel like post-pandemic a lot of the conversation's been quite surface level. Like on LinkedIn, you'll see these posts where it's like, oh, give us a like if you want to be in 2 days a week, or give us a hands up if you want to be fully remote. Whereas, like, I think that kind of deeper level conversation around, okay, like, what does motivate you? How has that mentally impacted you? What's the right scenario for you to be in so that you're kind of like happy?
Yeah, and people have lost their confidence.
Yeah, totally.
That's happened for a lot of people. They've lost their confidence because they've not been in their usual surroundings. They've not had much feedback at all. And if they have, it might have not felt usual, because it's on Zoom or however you're doing your sort of work meetings. So for people to rebuild their confidence is not going to be necessarily a quick thing. I certainly had that after I had a really terrible time mentally, and I kind of quit all of my jobs. I didn't know what I was going to do next. It's taken years to get to this place. Well, it's taken about 10 years to get to this place where I'm now in a new flow, doing something new, and I feel really happy, and I guess I do feel confident doing it, because I'm not having to pretend anymore or do something that's for show. I'm just talking. And I know that what I'm saying is what I believe, so I can't really go too wrong with that. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but I know that what I'm saying is genuine to me and hopefully will resonate with others. So I think, we need to give people time to integrate back into whatever happens next. I hate the phrase new normal. I literally...
Oh, me too.
it out the window.
I'm so over it.
It doesn't exist. I'm not allowed to swear, but you know what? It's rubbish. It needs to go. We don't know what's happening ever. We never have. Even before the pandemic, we don't know what's going on. Let's just be gentle with each other, gentle with people that we work with, and listen and give them time to build their confidence back up, because we've just been through hell.
I mean, with it is so important that we kind of accept the lack of control we have over the immense change. Anything. Yeah.
Life.
This interview.
Anything.
No, absolutely. And I think, the massive importance of discussing mental health now more than ever, or maybe it was always high, but we just didn't really open ourselves up and recognise that we needed to be talking about it. But I mean, obviously you started the podcast talking about these really difficult topics, and, it's really organic. Do you now feel any kind of sense of pressure to kind of, you touch the lives of 40 million people minimum with your podcast alone on this topic? Is there any kind of pressure now to make sure that, I think
there's a responsibility. I don't know if it's a pressure, because I actually like that responsibility. I don't feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do next? This is now, again, like I said, with podcasting, it's endless. There's always someone interesting to talk to. There's always someone who's going to have a brilliant story that we haven't heard yet, that we need to hear. And they're not always, people that are known. They're people from all walks of life who have really interesting tales to tell. So it is a responsibility, because I really... feel grateful that I have the listenership that I do. And I know from the beautiful messages that I get and the conversations that we're having on even just Instagram, that people are helped by hearing these stories. And I want to, if anything, the pressure, the responsibility is to look for subjects we haven't covered, to talk to people we haven't yet included, and to make everybody, again, feel heard. Because you could be listening to a story and it's not you talking, but someone might have a shared experience with you, and you go, that's me, that's how I feel. I had that the other day watching this amazing Netflix documentary on the tennis player Mardy Fish, who has panic disorder, and I'd never heard someone talk about panic like that. And he doesn't know who I am. I'm just sat in my pyjamas watching at home, but my jaw's on the floor. I was like, this is how I have felt at times. These are the feelings that I have. That's feeling heard. So we just need to cross off as many subjects as we can, and we could do that until I'm, hopefully an old lady, and we still won't have covered them all. That's what I want to keep. I want to keep doing it, and we'll still have more subjects to cover. It's endless. So the responsibility is there, but it's a juicy, wonderful challenge. It's not a scary one.
I think that's a very impressive attitude to take. So I think,
I like it. I like my job. Yeah. I only want to do this, so I've got to get it right. I can't do anything else but talk, so I have to get it right.
Well, you're nailing this, so
all I do is talk, literally.
That is
no
fantastic.
Other skill set, none.
But I guess that's what you say. The beautiful thing is that you're talking about something that really needs to be talked about, and you're, from your platform, you're able to bring it out into the norm, where more and more people feel comfortable talking about these kind of topics, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, we want people to not feel alone. All of us here today, all the people in this room, all the people in the studio, all the people watching, all the people in New York, wherever you are, you're trying to do, I'm doing my professional job, and I want to be good here, and I want to say the right things, and you want to say the right things, and the camera person wants to do the right things, and everyone wants to do the right things. look, we're all going through stuff in our actual lives. There is all stuff going on mentally in our heads all the time. Imposter syndrome, panic, feelings of being unworthy, relationship disorders going, all sorts of stuff. We've all got that. But we don't think we have. I could look at you two and go, oh, you're so smart, you're doing such a wonderful job, you've got it all sussed, whatever. We all think this about each other constantly. But we're all feeling all this stuff. And that's where we're going to connect. If we break that facade of I'm at work, I'm doing my best thing, or I'm doing whatever, and go to the human level of we've all got this stuff going on. Let's meet there rather than me feeling like, oh my God, I feel like such a freak because this is happening in my head and it's not happening for any of these people who look so smart and amazing and are doing a great job. Let's just get all of that nonsense out of the way and meet at the human level where we've all, everyone, Beyonce, everyone, all got stuff going on.
Beyonce.
Even Beyonce. Let's break the news. All got stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do say as well that actually, you know, a lot of times when you think and you're reflecting on problems, you always put yourself at the center of your own story, which then makes everything feel like it is way worse than it actually is. You're often, you know, scolding yourself about, you know, actions or things you said, or did this happen the right way, so on and so forth. But actually, 9 times out of 10, everybody else in the room is thinking about themselves and what they've done. So they haven't even noticed.
They're not worried about you.
They didn't see you pick your nose. It's fine.
No, they're not worrying about anything. Even the thing you said that you shouldn't have said, that you worry about, and it kept you up last night. They've not even thought of it. You know, we're just all worrying about. We're a bunch of narcissists. We're all worrying about ourselves and what's going on. But there's a beautiful thing about that, and that's to reframe that situation where we do go into berating ourselves, self-loathing, over, you know, ruminating on things that we just can let go of. The lesson in that is to be nicer to ourselves and to have compassion for the mistakes we've made. Again, this is like breaking the facade. Beyonce, she's made mistakes. She's made tons of mistakes. We've all made so many mistakes. That is where we grow. Like that's... We make a mistake, we think, I don't want to do that again, I'm going to learn from it, we grow. That's what we keep doing. Let's make more mistakes. So it's constantly having self-compassion. If you can have compassion for your friends and colleagues, you've definitely got the capacity to do it for yourself. We just deny it. We don't allow ourselves to feel compassionate about our own misdemeanors, whatever it is, and we just need to be nicer to ourselves.
That I think that's a totally fair point. I'll start being nice to Matt now.
You don't have to.
I'm holding him to that. I'm holding him to that.
That wasn't my direct advice.
Okay, good.
But it is good advice.
So you spoke a little bit about how I like also. What I learned from that also is like what's really cool is the representation. So hearing different stories. It may be that you hear one thing in one person's story that really resonates with you and be like, okay, I felt that, I know what that is. And you also spoke a little bit about like how like everyone in this room has, you know, we're here doing our jobs, going like doing this and then doing that. And I think we've had conversation about like personal struggles and how you deal with that and liking yourself. I think that's one thing where sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect, is that we almost have this kind of veneer where it's like, okay, we've come through the work door, we need to, we've got our suit on or whatever. I'm not wearing a suit, but
you've got your roll neck on.
Exactly. It's like, okay, now I'm pre-programmed to do X, Y, Z. And I think, well, I guess the question is, like, do you think there's something, or do you think there's any advice you would give to kind of promote a happier workplace?
Yeah, you know what, I've done, well, weirdly, over the last 18 months, I've spent so much time talking with companies because obviously everybody is having this discussion and wanting to, you know, have great conversations with the people they work with. And the one thing that I've learned, because I'm walking into these situations equally as curious and wanting to hear from, I've talked to psychologists about this, CEOs, etc. And the thing that seems to work with the companies that are really nailing this is it has to come from the top. So the person who's at the top of the tree has to be willing to be as vulnerable as they want their staff and their team to be. So if they can show vulnerability and say, you know what, it hasn't got to be dramatic, it hasn't got to be I had depression 20 years ago or I deal with OCD or whatever. It doesn't have to be something that seems dramatic, but you know what, I really struggled at this point, or I struggled yesterday, or I find this difficult about being a CEO, because there's a lot of responsibility being in that sort of position. I think if you can show vulnerability from the top, it's like being a parent almost, isn't it? I don't want to sound patronising, but I'm learning this as a parent. I'm expecting my kids to do this, this and this, but I'm not doing that. I'm not showing them that that's the way. And then I might get cross that they're cross, and it's because I'm shouting about stuff. So I think if we can, lead from the top and lead by example by showing your vulnerabilities, which I guess it feels counterproductive because you're meant to be the strong person at the top and you're leading the troops, whatever. But if you can talk about the struggles, the things that are difficult, the times that you've felt maybe imposter syndrome, that's always a really good one because you don't expect it of those sorts of powerful figureheads. But I think if it comes from the very top, there is a level of comfort that I think naturally, by osmosis, just seeps out into your team, and they might just feel like they might not reach out to the CEO, but they might reach out to the person that sits next to them. They might talk to the person that's head of mental health if you have that infrastructure and say something they didn't feel comfortable saying before.
Yeah. And I think actually, what I'd like to do at this point is actually just drill down onto a bit of an interesting duality. But before I do so, just for everybody who's still in this session, just want to remind you, we will have a chance to put your questions to Fearne as well. So please do pop those in the Q&A and vote on the questions you want to hear asked, and you will have a chance to have those questions asked as well, just a reminder. But the duality I wanted to pick up on actually is a topic that I think comes up a lot and has also been played out even more heavily during the pandemic, which is the role of technology in happiness. So I think, as we've gone through the pandemic, we've relied incredibly heavily on technology to fill the void of personal connection. You, of course, deliver your podcast content through technology. But there is also this conversation about us being too connected, too attached to our devices. How do you kind of manage that? Or, well, what are your thoughts on that, I guess,
Well, there's two things. I think there's how I manage it and the thoughts bit. Let's go with the thoughts first, which I think, we know there are problems and we know there are flaws and we know all of these things are addictive. So I think we have to have self-governance over how we use them. The technology isn't necessarily the big problem. It's just it's a free-for-all. We're not, we're still learning with this because in my generation, I got a mobile at maybe 14. It was this big and it did nothing and I could just about call people. And social media, I probably only got super involved with 10, 12 years ago. So I had a huge portion of my career without it, which I am so grateful for, because if I was 15 on TV and I had people who could directly contact me on my phones via social media, I would not be doing this still today. There's no way. At 15, you cannot deal with that if you're, in the public eye. So I'm forever grateful. I'm still trying to learn the best balance to get. And I think we have to treat ourselves like kids and go, put the phone down, you don't need to be doing this right now. But then sometimes, you know what, so my go-to on a personal note, if I'm feeling really discombobulated and I just need some headspace, my absolute go-to is listening to Eckhart Tolle's podcast, Essential Teachings, via an app. So I've got my headphones in, I go for a walk, I just listen to his calm voice and him talking about all manner of deep, huge concepts. And an hour later, I'm fine. So, I know in that case I've used the digital world to really enhance my own happiness, and it's worked. Yet, that night, I could be feeling really rubbish and low and be beating myself up because I did something wrong at work or whatever, or I haven't achieved what I need to be achieving. And then I'm scrolling, oh my God, I'm off, and I'm still doing it. And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I don't know what I've just seen. I've just had 10 minutes of stuff that there's no governance over any of that. Anything could come up, and it's gone in. And we underestimate the potency of that. We think, I was just looking at other people's clothes and their dog and whatever. But how are we using that information on a subliminal level? That is all going in, and we are trying to process it, and within that we're trying to find where we fit into it. Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Am I achieving? Am I not? We're constantly comparing ourselves. This is the compare and despair model that we just walk right into that trap every time we mindlessly go on our phones. So I think it's about going on your phone with intention, or your laptop, and using technology where it's going to help you, like listening to a good podcast, going on an app that is, a mindfulness app or whatever it might be, alongside not having your phone and being in nature. It's not all about the digital world. We've got to have it, running parallel with. But when we are using it, think, is this going to make me feel good or rubbish? because we don't, we just go on it and then we feel rubbish and we're like, oh, I feel like I need a bath, I'm very grubby right now, I need to like get this off of me. Whereas if we thought before, how's this gonna make me feel? Looking at what all these other people are doing all around the world, who I don't know, by the way. Why am I looking at Kylie Jenner's lunch? I don't need to know what she ate. It was probably a salad in a plastic bag. But why does that need to go in my head? It doesn't. So we just need to treat ourselves kindly again and think, I'm going to be really nice to myself today. I'm going to feed myself with goodness, and I can choose to do that in many ways. Is that going to work? Probably not. You know, is this going to work? Yes, that's going to be lovely. Thank you.
So, Kaz, question for you. Do you have rules in your house about how long you spend on the phone?
Okay, so no comment.
No comment.
That's a no. But it's interesting because I think there are times when I forget, like I take that advice, which is like sometimes you need to be a bit more conscious of what you're consuming rather than like, oh, I'm just going to pick up my phone and see what app I end up on why I end up scrolling past. We've all been on like TikTok or whatever, and just you're like...
I don't know how to use TikTok. I don't understand. I go... I don't know.
I think that's for the best.
Don't go down that.
Yeah, because your time just goes.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's really important. I've tried to start consciously looking at my screen time and being like, okay, well, it's going on these apps, and then being like, okay, well, I'm happy with it going on these apps. It's Headspace or it's whatever. It's apps that I'm happy. I'm using my time productively. It's having a positive impact. So I think I just need to be a bit more conscious about don't pick up your phone out of habit. Pick it up because you need to do something, or maybe it is some leisure time, but like know that it's that leisure time.
Maybe even, you know, I'm big on writing stuff down. I do, I write as soon as I get out of bed every morning, just write down stuff that's in my head. And I think it's not a bad thing to do some self-inventory. The quickest, easiest way to see what you're really feeling like is, say you've been on your phone for 10 minutes and then you kind of wake up, don't you? You go, oh my God, what am I doing? Where am I? I've crossed a road, I didn't even look at the cars. And then you go and you get a notepad and you honestly write down without too much thought what you feel like. It will probably be, if you've just been mindlessly scrolling, it will probably be, I feel a bit rubbish, I feel like I haven't achieved so much. It will probably be all of a negative sort of nature. Whereas if you have picked something consciously and it is a lovely podcast or it is a little meditation or whatever it is, you know you're going to feel all right afterwards. And you could even write down that, you know what, I feel calmer, I've slowed my pace down, I'm not comparing myself to other people. I think writing stuff down is always a good way of really seeing what you're feeling like.
And so, I mean, actually, that is something that we've been exploring with businesses recently, is this concept of you've probably seen it, right? At airports, you use the toilets, and then they have the smiley face system.
Oh, right,
how was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, like, how's my digestive system working? Inform that.
Feeling red. No, I mean, I think the interesting thing there is now more and more organisations are starting to implement a similar kind of like just on the app, on their like intranet or their kind of private portals for their employees. They're implementing these kind of anonymous smiley face systems like, how are you feeling today? Or how did you feel about the news of the big change the CEO announced? And just, that freedom to just say, at a touch of a button, actually, not happy, don't have to put your name to it, don't have to say anything, but a way to just kind of express that and know and just kind of hit the button. And kind of like...
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting concept because I guess, it can be handy for the people that are collating that because then they can make better decisions. But I think for you to do it just for you is the powerful bit for me. So yes, it's nice to have that release, and sometimes you might do it angrily. I want you to know this. Angry face. But for you to do it for you is really different because I think that's when the anger dissipates, or that's when the pointing of fingers dissipates, because you've got to go beneath that and look at, but why do I feel like this? Why do I feel a bit jealous? Why do I feel a bit angry about the CEO making this change? Why has that affected me and how? And that's for you. That's more important to me, rather than giving direct feedback so changes can be made. Yes, there's time and space for that, but for you to do it for you, and to really, if you're honest with yourself, go beneath that, rather than, that person's an idiot, they shouldn't have said that to me, that upset me. Like, okay, that's valid. Why? What did that hit? What was that? Do that for you. and look at it and read it back and see what you learn from those situations. That I think is really interesting.
So from a company perspective, what I take from that is like, it's really good to temperature check, understand how people are feeling, but it's also really about that conversation part, digging a bit deeper, people understanding what's informing that decision, not just the extremes of I'm happy or I'm sad or...
Yeah, it's more complex than that, isn't it? It's like, you know, we've got so many emotions that are bubbling up all day long and they'll change. You know, we're never like, and then I was happy. You know, that just doesn't happen. It's ever undulating, and, you know, that's why it's so complicated in the workplace, because you've got lots of different people with lots of different life experiences going on who are all, you know, trying their best, which will be a different level for everyone and a different level each day for us individually, because we'll have a good day today, a bad day tomorrow, etc. It's really complex issue.
So, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, mental health and well-being, it is a complex issue, and we're all very complex in of ourselves. And I think one of the things about the pandemic is that with the isolation, many of us have maybe got to know ourselves more intimately and obviously have changed as well. And I wondered, actually, because we've all kind of had to find our own way to deal with the change of the pandemic, can you share, so what did you do during the pandemic to keep yourself feeling good? You know, mental health and well-being. What did you do to feel good?
It was such a. It's when you look back now in hindsight, or not even in hindsight, reflect back on that time. There were so many phases of it. So the first phase, there was this kind of strange notion of. This is just such a wild moment, and there's such novelty to this, and we didn't really understand what the hell was going on at that point. Yeah. My kids are off school. I'm going to be such a cool teacher. They're going to love this. I'm going to do like follies and thoughts one day. We're going to do like butterflies the next. Day two, I'm like, they're not listening to me. They're not even sitting on their chairs. It was just a nightmare. And I didn't really know what I was doing work-wise at that point, because none of us did. We were going, oh my God, all my projects have just sort of stopped. So that was, and I'm not good with that. I need a focus, I need a challenge. I'm too hyper, I have to have something and I love being creative. So what kept us all sane at that point, and my husband's a musician, so he just instantly had no work for ever and ever, like literally just started working. So we would, at midday, we'd have lunch early, and then we were out in the park, and we had that lovely summer last year, very lucky. We went to the park every day. It was like clockwork. We built a structure without there being one, and it was looking for newts in the stream, and it was letting the kids run around and do their thing, and that kept us all in a headspace where we knew we could have lunch and do something every day, and that really helped. And then as things started to kick back off and we were like, how do we make the Happy Place Festival digital? Then it was like, oh my God, my workload has gone from nothing to insanity, and it was just so much. I had to learn how to use camera equipment at home. I'd never done any of this before. You know, thinking about, I didn't even know what Zoom was a year ago. You know, this was all new. So that was a real time of change, and I felt completely overwhelmed. And I think, again, going back to listening to that Eckhart podcast, listening to a good podcast, going for a walk on my own, because, you know, we either had in the pandemic, you're on your own, you feel super lonely, or I'm with my family and I want to run away. Like, there was no middle ground with that one. So I had to sort of go on a walk every day on my own, have that time out, and just, you know, what we should all be doing, day at a time, living in the now. We never do that. What's next? I'll feel much better when that's out the way in the future. No, you won't. You'll feel exactly the same. Let me just, spoiler alert, that's going to happen. So I just kept it in the day as much as I could, because I couldn't cope with anything else. Yeah. So I think always, if I'm feeling all over the shop, or if I'm feeling panics chasing me a bit again, because I still have panic attacks to this day, that is a big warning sign. Slow down. Go back to the simple basics. There's nothing complicated about this. There's no magic wand. There's no juice cleanse that's going to make you feel amazing. This is simple stuff. You try and get sleep. You go for walks. You block out all the outside noise when you're not feeling up to it. We don't have to know about everything going on in the world. We've normalised that. We didn't know, like 50 years ago, we didn't know what was going on in other countries. We hadn't, unless we went and bought a newspaper, we didn't know. We don't have to know. We don't have to feel bad about that. We're not ignorant for doing that. That is called self-care. If you can't cope with that, you bring it in. So it's back to basics always.
Amazing, amazing. So I think we're actually now getting prepared to go to our Q&A. Q&A for everyone watching the session right now. Let's see what you guys have all been asking.
Yeah, I'm going to have to love you and leave you. I've got my hair and makeup to do ahead of my neck.
Mind us.
I'm only kidding.
Yeah, more important places to be, clearly.
Only joking, or am I?
Probably not.
Your thing, you do.
I'll leave the Q&A to you. See you guys later. It was lovely. Thank you so much, Fearne.
You.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So I believe we're going to have a little look at the Q&A questions now. Thank you very much. Here we go. Perfect. And as expected, lots of questions from lots of people. So let's have a little look at the Q&A here. Okay. So the first question in here is from Sarah, and she asks, have you come across anything that has been really successful in improving employee well-being? You know, the businesses that you've kind of been to and spoken to. So improving employee well-being and workplace happiness. We've become much better about talking and listening to colleagues, but are there any tangible steps or mechanisms we could implement too?
Well, I think, you know, again, from the companies that I've worked with over the last year and a half, there are so many now who are getting subscriptions en masse for their staff for a certain podcast or a certain app that they can always use in times where they just need time out, or that might offer up new interesting tools like meditation being brought into the workspace. But I think really, I just do think it's about the simple basics of listening and for people to know that they're heard, because there's nothing worse than feeling really awful, whether it's an extreme mental health illness, which is a very different thing to just when we're talking about general well-being and mental health.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse when you're going through anything on that spectrum than adding on top of that loneliness, isolation, and feeling ostracised. So the more you can cultivate a feeling in the workplace that you're all listening to each other, and that's always going to be there in the background, I think that's a really solid foundation for whatever else you want to implement, whether it's a subscription, mindfulness courses, or meditation, or whatever it might be. I think you could do yoga every day and still feel awful if you weren't doing the absolute basics. So I think it's going back to, you know, am I talking honestly? Am I being heard? Am I listening to others? It can't be one way. And am I learning from others? And am people learning from what I'm saying? It's got to be a really beautiful, cohesive environment where everyone is. You don't have to always get each other, but there's got to be a sort of a willingness to listen. And that's not an easy ask, but I think it's a good, solid foundation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's really interesting because a few kind of examples during the pandemic and everyone moving to working from home, or at least with our business, our work is on our laptops.
Yeah.
Our laptops are then always on. You're always on. So actually, in our business, like our CEO. Really actively demonstrated that he'd heard the kind of feelings of burnout around the business, and he just kind of ad hoc said, right, Monday's a global recharge day. Everyone took the day off to do whatever they wanted.
How cool.
I thought it was awesome.
Well, that's great because, you know, I'm lucky in the fact that some of my work is on a laptop, some of it's not. And I've like big research periods, whatever, and I love that. I don't know if I would have coped doing that. I really don't think I'm the sort of person that could have coped with having my laptop open all day and having to have relentless Zooms. There were periods of that, and I did feel completely overwhelmed by it. So I think you do need to, you know, we're still sort of in this limbo land of people are doing a bit of both, but we do definitely have to sort of be mindful of how people are feeling with huge changes and huge shifts like that.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And then our next question is from Charlie. Do you have any suggestions for how to convince senior leaders to let go of the scripts and be happy with the more relaxed format of the podcast? Does it have a place in the corporate environment?
What, the podcast or feeling relaxed?
Yeah, let's go with both. Okay. Let's go with both.
Definitely podcasting, like absolutely. I think, look, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what level you're at, all of us want honesty. We want the real deal. We want the real person. The people that I'm most attracted to who are in the public eye or at a top level of whatever they're doing are not necessarily the shiniest, they're real, that you can see like they're human. Like, for instance, one of my all-time favourite people to interview, and just also as a fan, is Dave Grohl, who could not be more top of his game, but he's a human. He's not like wearing a different outfit to be the version of him on stage. The version of him that you're going to see in the supermarket is the version you'd see of him on the stage. He's the real deal. And I think podcasting allows you to get that out of someone. I don't want to listen to a podcast where someone's got a really formatted question and then the answer is also really well thought out. I want the mistakes and the bits that are real and the bits that are stumbly and like the real bit. That's what I definitely want. So I think, yes, levels of relaxation at work, who am I to say? That's up to the individual who's, running the job, I guess. But I think we all want to feel relaxed. There's times to be, I guess, running on adrenaline or working in that high octane way, but you can't do that 24/7. That's impossible. There has to be moments where there is, even if it's sort of enforced relaxation, there are times where we're not just running and chasing our tail and, oh my God, my inbox is so full, and, there has to be time out from that. Otherwise, we will all literally lose our minds.
Absolutely. And Charlie, my advice on how to convince your CEO to relax and do a podcast is to hire Fearne, because she's a very captivating talker and I'm sure she'll have him convinced to do it in a heartbeat.
Them. Yeah.
There we go. Next question from Doug. What platform do you suggest for hosting company podcasts? Currently we use Stream, but this isn't ideal. So is there a specific kind of technology that you use? Or?
I would literally have to ask my podcast producer for that one, because I just do the talking. So I don't know. I mean, we have ours on any platform. So wherever you get your podcast, you will find Happy Place. And that's because we've never, aligned with one company and said we're exclusively doing a deal with you where... that's a monetary situation. So we've never aligned with any one company. You can listen on Spotify, you can listen on Apple Music, wherever you want to get it. So that's more of a technical thing that I have less understanding of. I'm sorry for the very useless answer.
No, not at all. I think actually it's a great great point, because we often talk about the need to, go to where the listeners are, basically.
Yeah.
So, maybe don't limit yourself to a single place. Maybe work out.
Put it everywhere.
Put it everywhere.
And and then put it on YouTube. Even if there aren't visuals, it doesn't matter. You can just put a graphic up, put it on YouTube, or if you can film it, if it's on Zoom, put it out there. Get it out in as many places as you can.
Because the thing that Kaz didn't talk about actually was that he put an article out, a very personal article actually, that he was willing to share with the business. He published something internally with us all, and he actually recorded himself doing the podcast as well. So he had both the article and podcast.
Love that.
It was really cool. It was really good.
Yeah,
and it's
great.
refreshing because hearing somebody's voice certainly brings a story to life.
It does.
You really connect with it more, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's, as you said earlier as well, the thing that I hate the most about texting people or messaging people is the lack of tone of voice. It leads to so much misinterpretation.
It's gone. You don't get the texture, the cadence. It's all wiped out. So there is something. That's why I fell in love with the medium of radio in my early 20s, because it was just that. It's just a voice. There is. The rest is your imagination, but you're there and you're hearing emotion, you're hearing the feeling behind it. You can tell if someone's lying. Mm-hmm. It's all there.
Yeah.
It's all. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. It is there. Whereas in a text or, a piece written, you can get away with anything. But when it's your voice, all the clues are there. And if it's used properly, it's a beautiful thing.
Fantastic. So just having a look at some of our other questions here. Here we go, just the next one. Okay, here's a great one. So what top tips would you give for creating a really engaging podcast? So if an organisation out there is thinking, I can get my CEO to do a podcast, what are the top tips?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's a lot of podcasts out there. So don't worry too much about, I've got to do something no one's ever done before. It doesn't have to be original and unique. I think it's about bringing whatever you're passionate about and whatever you're talking about to life. So again, don't worry too much about, this is the weird sort of paradox of a podcast. I do a lot of work to make it sound like it was completely organic the whole way through. So I do a lot of research and a lot of looking at backstory. So if we do go off on a tangent that I hadn't planned for, being a control freak, I can go off on it, but I can come back. So I don't want it to sound like, and here's my next question that I had ready, but I know I can go to it if we naturally end up in that area. So I think you've got to know what you're talking about enough to feel then relaxed to let go and to see where you end up. So I always think the research bit that no one knows about is way more important than the time you're actually recording it. Because if you've done all that, you will feel in a place of confidence where you can relax, let go. And as I said right at the start of this talk, it's storytelling. Whether it's your own story, whether it's your story in collaboration with someone else talking about their life. But give people the space to tell their story. Don't be too quick to jump in because you've got this brilliant question that you can't wait to say. And when someone's answering and they're saying something that feels important, again, it's an awkward thing to leave a gap. It's an awkward thing to go, and? Because it feels uncomfortable. But it's often where the person then goes, yeah, and then this. And then there's something just beautiful that comes out. So look for those little real moments by just giving someone the space. It might even make them feel a bit uncomfortable, but that discomfort will probably lead them to say something even more real. So don't be scared to just keep it really slow.
Okay, amazing. That is fantastic. So I actually missed one question here because they're voted, so I've got to be sticking to the order in which they want to hear them. So there you go. That's me being honest. I made a mistake. It was
mistakes are welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
You should have grown from that mistake in a tiny way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't help that I never hold iPads. But the question was, can you point out any companies, either through personal experience or from what you've heard or read about, that you think are doing really well on the front of employee well-being? Big initiatives you might have read about, or any organisations that you've kind of spoken to that you think do it well?
I think it's tricky because unless you're working there, you don't really know. Like, I've talked to so many CEOs, from banks to insurance companies to media outlets, all sorts of huge places of work. And I'm loving the discussion, I'm loving talking to the CEO, I'm loving hearing the questions from the audience who are employees. But I don't know, because I don't work there. I think you have to... The only way you can know is to be in that environment 24/7 and to feel... It's the feeling of it. I don't think it's ever so much the actions. It's not always going to be like the subscriptions in place, the time out in place, whatever. That's going to help. But I think it's the feeling of the place. Is the place run with fear, or is it run through encouragement? You know, I've worked in places that have been run from the top by fear, and it's a horrible experience, and it's not nice. You feel on edge, you're terrified of making a mistake, you can't feel relaxed, and it's not nice. But then equally, like, you know, I grew up, for example, working with this amazing production company called Darryl McQueen as a kid, and there was no fear in sight. We were encouraged constantly to try again, to do our best, and that helped me sort of thrive as a teenager to keep doing the job that I wanted to do. So it's so important there is a feeling of encouragement and not fear of that you're going to make a mistake and it's all going to be awful. It's the feeling of the place. So I wouldn't want to name anywhere without having actually worked there, because I don't think that's fair.
I think that is a fantastic answer. I think it's absolutely, you know, the feeling of the place, not necessarily an individual action or an individual campaign that grabbed the spotlight.
Yeah, it's a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will do one last question. Okay, so do you have any particular views about improving visibility of leaders within a business?
In what terms? In just sort of how...
I guess it's like, in most businesses, I think certainly, you know, in many large businesses, people are always kind of looking up. They want that kind of level of validation and guidance from leaders who, you know, set the direction of the business, drive us all towards our shared mission.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it goes back to what I said before about there has to be vulnerability shown there in that place of leadership, so that you're leading, again, you know, without fear. You're leading by honestly saying, I've made mistakes, I've had these times that have been tricky, I'm not as shiny as I might look. Because, you know, as we said, nobody is. We're all just trying our best, and some have got into really powerful, brilliant places and are using that position brilliantly. But I think we have to always lead by example, and if we're willing to, tell our honest story, it hasn't got to be the whole story, but certainly offer up things that feel real, then that's the culture that you'll implement, to the rest of your team. So I think, rather than being a sort of distant, looming character that is just controlling things from the top or that isn't seen or heard, I think, that might not feel natural to some CEOs. I'm not saying everyone has to be like, here's my whole life story. It might feel super uncomfortable, but I think if there is at least a nod to that or a feeling that is fine to say, you know what, when I was giving that talk, I was really nervous, or whatever it might be, that's really encouraging for people to feel okay about feeling stuff. It's all about being okay with feeling. We're trying to suppress all these feelings of nerves, I'm lesser than, I'm not worthy. Just let it be, we all have those feelings. And I think that, again, has to come from someone who feels important so that you believe it. Not just someone you're sat next to, the person that looks like they've got it all sorted. I think that's really powerful.
I could not agree more. And on that very powerful note, we are going to bring our session with Fearne to an end. Let me say thank you so much for joining us and sharing all those insights with our attendees. I'm sure that everyone learned something from that session. I know I certainly learned a lot. It was amazing to be able to chat to you and hear about all of that. So
I enjoyed
thank you.
Thanks.
For the rest of you staying tuned in, we do now have 2 more sessions coming up. So this is where the conference will split between the comms and the tech track. Now, if you're staying with us on the comms track, then don't do anything. You can just sit there, relax, top up your coffee, and we will take care of the heavy lifting. But you can, if you want to, go to unily.com/unite-21 if you want to get back and check out the agenda, or just click on the upcoming sessions. I think top left will be up here somewhere for you. So you click on that and you can choose if you want to swap to our tech track, where you get a chance to pose questions to some of our technical engineers and operations engineers. So 2 great sessions for you. Stay tuned. There'll be a couple of minutes and then we'll load up that for you. Fearne, thank you very much again. Thank you.